We're freeborn Englishmen, and our tradition of liberty goes back a long way. To the Saxons, maybe, even further. And, it was all encoded in the Magna Carta, which said we're autonomous, lawful entities who the king has to respect. Before the Magna Carta, the king could do what he wanted. But Stephen Langton, who was the Archbishop of Canterbury, he said, look, the king has got to respect the law of God as revealed in the Bible. And it says in the Bible, he who the Lord makes free is free indeed. If you're a Christian, you're a free man, you're a free spirit. And that was challenged, of course, by a lot of kings who didn't like respecting the freedom of their subjects. And it all came to a head with Charles I, who believed in the divine right of kings, that he was anointed by God and he could do whatever he wanted. But the English people rose up against Charles I, led by Oliver Cromwell. And when they rose up, they said, the people under God are sovereign, and you've got no right to be a tyrant in this country. We are freeborn Englishmen. And that spirit of liberty began to flow and grow. But they still tried to take it off us. We had another Catholic king, James II, who again began to restrict the freedom of speech and the liberties of England. And William of Orange, he crossed the channel from Holland. And on his banner, on his ships, he said, I have come to defend the liberty of England and the Protestant faith. And when he began, the Glorious Revolution also involved a constitution which guaranteed the freedom, the liberty of Englishmen. And we contrasted that against the French. The French had an absolute monarch. They didn't have the freedoms we had, especially the freedom of speech, the freedom of assembly, the freedom to express yourself. And we actually fought a war against the French, the Napoleonic Wars. And we fought before that in the 7 Years' War, which was like the First World War. And in that war, we had a song the British people would sing against the French. Rule Britannia, Britannia rules the waves. Britons never, ever, ever shall be slaves. Who were the slaves? The French were the slaves because they didn't have the liberty of the Englishman. This is our God-given right. No one can take it from us. Not king, not parliament, not anybody. And Donald Trump, in his inauguration speech yesterday, said, we are restoring the freedom of speech, the freedoms of the American people. You cannot use the state to prosecute your political opponents. You cannot criminalize people simply because they disagree with you. And this is what's happening now. These things like hate speech, it's just a label. You hate the truth being spoken. This is what the establishment does. When we challenge them, when we point out their domineering ways, their anti-democratic ways, their conspiratorial ways, when they abuse us, we rise up against it. And this mass uncontrolled immigration is a form of abuse of the British people. And we have a right to speak out against it. But they're saying it's hate speech. Where does this label come from? It's got no standing in law. Hate is just a strong dislike of something. For example, I hate Satanism. I can criticize Satan. I can criticize his followers. I can criticize what he advocates. And I can hate it if I so desire. If I have a strong dislike of it, so be it. They're saying now that no, you can't hate Satanists. You can't hate Satanism. You have to respect it and tolerate it. Well, this is nonsense, because I will not tolerate evil. The Bible says we ought to hate evil. This is a strong dislike of something which is repugnant, and we have the right to do that. We have the right to hate. There is nothing wrong with hate. It's just an emotion. There is love, what you support, and there is hate, what you disagree with strongly. And the idea that you criminalize people who hate what you support is an abuse of power. It's a form of tyranny. Now, I'm not advocating violence. The European Human Rights Act says there's two limits to free speech. One is you cannot advocate violence. You cannot incite to violence. Fully accept that. I think violence is out of order. But now the government is saying you can't incite hatred. Hang on, hatred's an emotion. Hatred's just a question of taste. You can't make hatred a criminal concept. It's nonsense. The other limitation that the European Court of Human Rights put on free speech was that you can't defame people, which means basically you can't tell blatant lies about people. For example, if I said John Lawrence was a dwarf and I put that on the internet, and John could quite rightly take me to court and say, I'm not a dwarf, I'm 6'3", don't you dare talk to me like that. And that's acceptable because you're telling blatant lies, and lies can be contradicted through the legal system. But the idea that your opinions and your tastes are going to be controlled by the legal system is absolute nonsense. It's contrary to everything in England's tradition, in British tradition, and American tradition, and we're going to stand up against it. And like if Keir Starmer wants to impose a Stalinist tyranny on the British people, we're going to fight back against that. And now we've got Donald Trump on our side, and I believe we're going to win.